Good evening. Can I welcome you all here to Monyhull Church, to our cafe church this evening. I want to welcome if you're here, if you made it in person, you're enjoying the cake, hopefully. But I also want to welcome if you're joining us online. My name's Andy Cole. I'm one of the ministers of the church, and I'm just so glad you're with us here this evening. Now, this meeting is not a formal church service. As you can see, it's just an informal time to be together. An informal opportunity to hear a couple of people speaking about the Christian faith and why we as a church think it's still relevant, even in our secular society. It's an opportunity as well, not just to listen, but to bring your questions and your comments this evening. We will have a time of Q&A at the end with a roving mic, and there will be a Slido running as well. If you want to go online, you can submit your questions and comments on Slido. Now, as a church here, we're passionate about engaging with the big questions that we all have about life and faith. Who am I? Where did we come from? And why are we here? And as a church, we respect the doubts and the different opinions that people have about those questions. But we are convinced that the Christian faith gives the most compelling answers to these questions. So for our meeting tonight, we have two speakers. John Catlin is a professor of psychology at the University of Birmingham, and he's a member of Monyhull Church. John is going to be interviewed by Tim, another of our members, asking him about his faith and his experience as a Christian academic. After John has spoken, we'll have a short break, get a bit more cake, and then Paul Mallard will be coming up to give us a talk. Paul studied theology at Cambridge University many years ago, and then he went on to pastor churches, a number of churches, for over 40 years before his retirement. Paul now serves as one of the leaders of Monyhull Church, and Paul is going to be sharing with us about an encounter in the Bible between one of the early Christian missionaries and the thinkers and philosophers of Athens. After Paul has spoken, we'll have another short break, a bit more cake, and then we'll have our time for Q&A at the end. So please do gather up your questions. If you're thinking of questions as we go along, do feel free to jot them down into Slido, and hopefully we'll be able to cover most of those. Well, I'm going to get out of the way now without any further ado. So I'd like to invite John and Tim up to the front. Can we please show our appreciation for John and Tim sharing with us?
Hello, everyone. Is this working? Yeah. Hi, Tim. Hi, Tim. Hello there.
John, you very wisely helped me come up with some questions to talk to you about.
We're not supposed to admit that.
Oh,
it's spontaneous. Okay.
Is that better?
Okay.
I'm not sure I want the guys at the back to hear. They might start cheering. John, you're here today to talk about your journey to faith and your experiences as a Christian academic working at Birmingham University. So, can you tell us who you are?
Okay, yeah. So I'm John. I am married to Jo, who's somewhere at the back. I've got two daughters, Izzy and Susie, who are quite grown up now, and they're away at university. I've been at the church for about 20 years now, and some of the ways that I'm involved with the church, so I'm involved with leading some of the youth. So my Sunday, which is, I usually do the older group there, the kind of 14 to 18 group, and involved with a fellowship group as well. So I've been around quite a while.
Well, how did your journey to faith start?
I grew up in a slightly unusual home life. So my mum was a Christian, but my father wasn't, and it isn't now. So my mum, from quite an early age, thought it was important to take myself, my brother and sister to church. So yeah, from an early age I went to church. And I can remember being quite young, maybe even like 5 or 6, and just realising that just wanted to think it was important. It was important that I was safe, in a sense, important that I was safe with God, and in a very simple way, but I think it was still very real. I did accept accepts Jesus as my Lord and Saviour at that time. I had no idea about all the complicated theology around that, but I do believe that's where I came to faith. But it was very much my God was very much up there, and it wasn't really relational based, and I was quite scared. I was at quite a tough school at the time. It was one of those schools where you just didn't want to stand out in any way. You didn't want to kind of be the one that was standing out, maybe get bullied. So I kept it very quiet. And for most of my childhood, it was kind of like coming to church on the Sunday, but it didn't really impact the rest of my life very much. I was quite moral, so I was quite careful in the things that I did, but I wasn't brave in some of the ways that I see actually some of the kids at the church are today. And actually, it wasn't until I was 18 and I went away to university. So it was a big step for me. So none of my family had ever gone to university before. We weren't a very academic family. So I turned up and a little bit bemused by everything that was going on. One of the first things that happened was I was in a flat there, and there was another Christian in the flat. And he said, "Do you want to come along to a Christian Union? I don't know, it's like a baked potato party or something like that." I just thought, well, it's food, so that's great. I'm in on that. And at that point, I met a lot of people who were Christians, but quite different from me. They had a real relationship with God. And it was at that moment that my faith, my relationship with God started to change. So up to that point, God was up there. But from then, he started to become more in here and have a relationship. There was a lot of more mature Christians there, and I had a lot of good teaching. And so that was really transformative for me in terms of my faith. And it was interesting, this morning we had someone here talking about the Christian Union at Birmingham, and they've got a mission this week. Yes. And I realised how important that is. People at university, young people, they're still very, very open-minded, maybe more open-minded than we get when we're a bit older, willing to ask these kind of questions, willing to be challenged. So I think that time away, for those people that do have that experience, it's actually really important. So yeah, it was pivotal for me, and it was a real kind of a starting point for me kind of growing in my faith.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So I think I saw God as a bit of a scary head teacher until I went to university. Then I was really surprised by how genuine and sincere and caring Christians were, and I was a bit shocked by that. So coming back to being a professor, what would a day at work look like for you?
Well, a lot of it's not actually that exciting. So, like probably many of us, I spend a lot of time on a computer doing emails, doing admin, and just helping to run the course. So where I'm at Birmingham, we have over 1,000 students there, so it takes quite a lot of time to do that kind of organisation. But then there's the bits of the job that I enjoy more. So there's part of it is teaching. So I do a lot of teaching on the undergraduate degree there, and I also get time to do some of my own research as well.
Okay, so here's a trick question for you. Is psychology an art or a science?
I'd say for me, and I'll come back to this in a moment, it's a science. Okay. Yeah.
I'll take your word for it. Do you enjoy your teaching? Do the students behave?
Yeah, it's a good question. Be careful, might be some students here. Yes, I really enjoy it. I feel it's a real privilege actually to work with young people. They're bright, they're enthusiastic, and they always surprise me in terms of the things that they get up to. I have big lectures, so you can imagine a big lecture theatre with maybe 300-400 people in, and they're there, and mostly they're quiet and attentive. Occasionally a few of them fall asleep, I have to say. It's when they snort. That would
never happen at Monyhull, I'm sure.
I think in terms of behaviour, the one story I've got is often it's the beginning of term, and you've got students just arriving, and they're all a little bit dishevelled and haphazard. And I'll be there at the front, big auditorium, and I've started doing my lecture. About 15 minutes in, out of the corner of my eye, I see the door open, and a student starts to shuffle in. And I'm trying not to be put off, I was trying to carry on what I'm doing. And it's quite full, and there's one seat that's free, just about in the middle of the auditorium. And you see them coming through, and they've got a rucksack. I got to stand up, they've got a rucksack on. As they're shuffling through, they're turning around, they're knocking things over, laptops are going over, Coke's going over, and eventually they make it into the middle there. They sit down, coats off, rucksacks off, laptops open, they sit down. I'm continuing to speak, but out of the corner of my eye, I can just see that steady realization as they look at the screen that this isn't chemistry. I'm in the wrong lecture. And then what would you do? What would you do at that time? For me, I'd be mortified. I'd probably just sit there. But no, laptop closes, rucksack back on, and the carnage that follows as they kind of head out. But bless them. No, I love working with young people. I really do.
So your research, what kind of research might you do?
So again, research, I'm privileged with that. So I work in two domains really. So I work with those that are, I'll be careful how I say this, but older, so maybe over 65. And I look at the research in terms of how we can, again, I have to be very careful. We know that when we get to 65, we have a little bit of cognitive decline. Okay, actually, when we get to my age, we get a little bit of cognitive decline. But so my research is how can we slow down that cognitive and physical decline in kind of over 65-year-olds. We've got some good examples here of people doing the right thing, actually.
Eating cake?
Eating cake can be good. Yeah, it's just not too much cake. So yeah, looking at things that we can do to just can improve that. And then the other scale of things, majority of my research is working with young people, actually, and looking at how we can help them with their mental well-being. So we know that life is harder for young people these days than maybe when you and I were kind of that age, and looking at things that can help them in terms of their mental health. So things that aren't good for them and things that are good for them. So we know quite a bit already about things that are helpful for them to keep them kind of healthy physically and mentally as well. So again, that I really enjoy that. It's working with younger people.
So then, what are some of the positives and some of the challenges of working in a university environment?
So I guess one of the maybe more recent challenges is working in an environment where students come in, young people come in, and the idea of seeking truth, that there is truth out there, and we're looking for evidence, actually is quite alien to them. So sometimes people talk about we're in a post-truth society where actually it's all about my personal truth, as it were. So actually, one of the things I teach is what we call critical thinking. So thinking carefully about where do we get our evidence from. So what is usually the case is they'll come up and say, "Oh, I heard this. I heard that the moon landings aren't true. I heard this." And I said, "Well, where did you hear that?" And it's like, "Well, it was on TikTok, and I'm pretty sure that it's true." So this idea about where we get evidence. So when I was younger, I wasn't so into the Bible, but I was happy with the idea that it was true or it wasn't, and Jesus says that he is the way, the truth, and the life. So we need to have a concept of truth before we can really start thinking about Jesus being the truth. So that's one of the challenges, is actually just trying to help young people think, really. Not about what they believe, but just think of those tools of thinking. And I guess the other challenge within that university context is I'm really, really thankful. I've got some really lovely colleagues and friends that I work with, and that is lovely, actually. I feel very thankful for that. But the underlying ethos, in my view, within university at the moment is one of liberalism and tolerance. So, but it's a limited tolerance. So it's tolerant. I'm tolerant of you as long as you subscribe to probably the majority kind of progressive worldview or kind of the zeitgeist, as it were, of the time. And that makes it difficult when it comes to views on maybe, I don't know, things that are quite sensitive, maybe things like end of life or beginning of life or marriage and things like that. So there's an assumption that we're very, very open, very accepting, But actually, if you've got a view that's a bit differing to the mainstream, it can be looked down upon, or it can feel a bit pressured actually to kind of conform with that. And I think students feel that as well as they find their way through what they believe.
Yeah, the pressure to be on the right side of history, for example, can be a big pressure. So Paul's going to be talking about Athens and some of the philosophers there. And I just wondered, just to finish up here, is there a perception of arrogance with being an academic, working in a university? Some Christians might think, you lot are up in your ivory tower, coming up with your theories for everything. And what do you feel about that?
That's a difficult question. I guess what I'd say is that yes, but I'll put a but in there as well. So I think yes, that there isn't sometimes an arrogance there, in that we're looking for truth. We're going to find the evidence. We're going to find the answers, as it were, and there isn't necessarily a place for God in that setup. But I guess the challenge would be is I think that actually we find that arrogance in different ways throughout life and throughout all vocations, in a sense. So if we talk about philosophy, so one of my favourite philosophers is a guy called Pascal. He was I think about 18th century French mathematician and philosopher, and he's often misquoted. So it's where we get this idea of this God-shaped hole. So he talks about us having a God-shaped hole, but actually it's often misquoted, because that's not really what he said. He talked about us having a void, or I think the best translation is actually a vacuum. So if you think about a vacuum, if you think about when you're watching a science fiction film and something's in space and there's a crack in the screen or the window and there's a vacuum outside, and what happens is everything gets sucked into the vacuum. And I like that translation because I think that's really true of human nature. I think we do have a God-shaped vacuum. And the thing about a vacuum is, because it sucks things in, anything can get sucked into that space. Things that are given to us from God and actually good can actually get sucked into the wrong way. So that could be money, it could be career, it could be relationships, it could be status, it could be, sporting expertise or anything like that. Or in this case, it could be knowledge, and this drive for knowledge and truth could be sucked in and become that thing that is central to us. So I think we do that in academia, but I think actually it's bigger than that. I think we do that in whatever we're doing. So you see that even in sports sometimes. Sport is a great thing, but you see sometimes sportsmen and women, even watching the rugby this afternoon, talking about sport and being that's the thing. That's the thing that I get up and I live for, as it were. So yeah, hopefully that's a nice link to what Paul's going to be talking about later as well.
Thank you, John. So that's been really informative and fun to listen to, and a good chance to get to know you a bit better. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, so we'll have just a short 5-minute break, comfort break, cake break. Go and get a top-up of coffee if you want. 5 minutes, and then Paul will be joining us at the front. share with us. Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the clap, Jeremy. That's great. That's good. That's good. And for those of you who don't know the Villa score at the moment, would you like me to tell you? No. I don't know, but there you go. There you go. On your tables, you may find, there aren't many of these, but the thing that says ultimate questions. And that's the passage in the Bible. We're going to read together in just a moment. And I'm not going to work through it like we do normally on a Sunday when we come together as a church. I'm going to use it as a kind of a launch pad to understand some of the things that we talked about earlier, some of the ultimate questions that people ask. Before we read it, let me just say a couple of things. We're going back in our minds to the city of Athens 2,000 years ago. Athens was the intellectual capital of the world. Philosophy, and to a certain extent psychology and all the other ologies, began in Athens. It had famous people like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. It was the place where philosophy was born and democracy. And they loved, it says in the passage, we're not going to read the whole passage, but it says they loved new ideas. And they loved questions. They loved the kind of questions that we're going to be thinking about tonight. Questions about who we are and who God is. And what's the world about? Where do we come from? Is there such a thing as truth? Is there absolute truth? And those kind of questions were what they raised. And so this man, Paul, who was a missionary traveling around Europe telling people about Jesus, comes to Athens, and he's absolutely shocked, not by the philosophy, but by the fact that the place is absolutely filled with idols, with images, with different religions. In fact, somebody, not Paul, but somebody said there are more idols in Athens than there are people. And they're filled with, so superstitious, in fact, that just to make sure they've got every base covered, they've got an idol, and it says, to the unknown God. We've got an image of every God we know. God could be anything like this or that, and there's even unknown God. And it says that Paul, when he looked at it, was absolutely brokenhearted. What was said earlier about the vacuum, this vacuum in their lives had been filled with false ideas about what God was like. And he was absolutely brokenhearted because they were so sophisticated and they were so lost, so intelligent and yet so blind. And so he begins to teach, and he begins to teach in a place like this. It was a synagogue, but the equivalent of a church, to people who are interested. And then he moves into the marketplace next door, and he begins to speak in the marketplace. And the philosophers listen to him and say, this is a new idea. We've never heard anything like this before, so will you come to the town hall? And he appears in the town hall, and that's when he begins to explain the Christian faith. And that's the bit that we're going to read. If you've got these in front of you, if you can see one, there's a little 22 about a third of the way down, and that's where we're going to start reading from. The name of the town hall, incidentally, was the Areopagus. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. Sophisticated, yes, but also very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God." Let's cover all our bases. Let's make sure we've got everything. We don't want to miss a God that might be there. We don't know who he is. We don't know what God is like at all. But let's just cover our bases. So you're ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. And he does not live in temples built by human hands. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man, he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. You're searching in the dark. You don't know, but do you know what? God is close. He's near. You can know God personally. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we're God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made in human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. It simply means you've been running away from God. You need to come back. For he said today, when he would judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed, he has given proofs of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. My wife and I had 4 children, and our youngest was called Emmaus, and when she was small, her favourite game was hide and seek. You know, you go and hide and somebody comes and looks for you. But she was always the one who hid, and she always hid in exactly the same place. In our house, we had a curtain that went to the floor, and she went behind the curtain, she pulled the curtain, and even though her little toes were sticking out underneath the curtain, that was the place. So I played along. I would go in, and I'd go into the room and look at her little toes, and I'd say, where's Emmaus? Is Emmaus behind the bookcase? And this little voice would say, no, Daddy, I'm behind the curtains. She didn't really get the game, you know. Is Emmaus under the table? No, Daddy, I'm behind the curtains. Is Emmaus behind the sofa? No, stupid Daddy, I'm behind the curtains. She really didn't get the game. But you know, lots of people think that God is like that. He's hiding and he doesn't want to be found. Whereas all the time, God is actually saying, I'm here. I'm not behind the curtains, but in the universe all around you. You go to the pictures, the cinema, you know, when it starts, it says Dolby sound. Have you ever been, you see that? This sound, it kind of echoes through the whole cinema. Well, God is like Dolby sound. He's everywhere. You can't escape from him. And human philosophy, which they practiced in great deal at Athens, was all about finding the ultimate meaning of the universe, finding in a way God, the ultimate principles. And they had all sorts of ideas about God, but they didn't come to any conclusion. When I studied theology at university, I had to do 1 year of philosophy. And you get to choose. You could have done these guys, the ancient philosophy, Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, and I should have done that, because these guys at least believed that there was such a thing as right and wrong and truth and falsehood. But I didn't do that, and I didn't do medieval philosophy, which would be interesting. I thought, well, I'm a modern man. You know, I was born in the 50s, so I'm a modern man. But I'll do modern philosophy. So I did a term of modern philosophy, and at the end of it, basically, I couldn't understand it. I just thought, what on earth have I done? So I went to see my philosophy professor, and I said, look, I'm really, really struggling. I don't understand modern philosophy. He said, don't worry. Nobody does. Which was kind of encouraging, but when your professor says it, whereas actually, when we come down to it, what Paul is doing, if you like, is cutting through all those doubts and all those confusions, and he said, look, you've got all these ideas. Some of you are very superstitious, and some of you are very intelligent and philosophical, but I want to tell you the reality of the true and living God. And I want to tell you about Jesus, who shows us God. I want to answer 3 questions, says Paul. I want you to understand who God is, really, truly. And I want you to understand who you are as human beings. And I want you to understand who Jesus is. 3 questions. So very briefly, and I need to be brief because we want to have our own questions at the end. First question is, who is God? Who is God? You're very religious, he says, and you've got all sorts of ideas. And actually, that shouldn't surprise us, because what John was saying, there is a vacuum within the human heart and mind, and something will fill that vacuum. If he's not God, it's something else. And for many people today, 21st century, it's spirituality. It's some kind of fuller, higher meaning. If you ever go to Waterstones, look at the spirituality books. You know, you'll find a couple of Bibles and a couple of books on the history of Christianity, maybe a couple of books on Buddhism and Islam, and then you'll have row upon row upon row upon row about spirituality, which is very vague and nobody quite knows what it means. And in a sense, it's what we don't need to know, we just have this kind of existential feeling. Whereas Paul said, I want you to know this God. I want you to know the God who is infinite, all-powerful. He's not a pathetic, powerless force. He's the God who made the world and everything in it. He's the creator. We didn't come by chance. It wasn't an accident that we're here. The world isn't an accident. The world was made by God. That's why there's such order and beauty and why there are laws of nature. God made the world. And to make a world like this, he's amazing. I remember reading once of a guy who used to play with his little son, and his son had a little tricycle, and from time to time a wheel would come off the tricycle, so he'd bring it to his daddy. He'd say, Daddy, mend it. And the dad would always get a screwdriver and mend the tricycle wheel. Fantastic. One day the little boy came to his dad, and he'd been in the garden of the tricycle, and he'd gone over a snail. And he picked up this snail, and he shows his dad this kind of crushed snail, and he said, mend it, Daddy. Well, a snail is not a particularly sophisticated animal, is it? And yet I couldn't make a snail, could you? But God could. God creates something as amazing as our brains, as our bodies. He's the creator of all things, and he's the sustainer of all things. Paul says, in him we live and move and have our being. Every beat of my heart, every breath in my lungs, God gives me. Now, it's easy to say, well, I'm not sure whether there's God there. Well, try holding your breath for a minute. God gives us those things. He sustains us. One of my friends, Mike, had a battle with cancer last year. It was quite an amazing story. He looked as if he'd lost his battle, but then he's come through, and I saw him a few weeks ago. He's doing exceptionally well. But he said to me, during the middle of that battle, people would come to me and say, come on, Mike, you can do it. You can do this, Mike. You can do it. And he said that was the last thing I needed to hear, because I couldn't do it. I felt totally weak and totally I knew how weak I was. And that's all of us. God is infinite. He's powerful. He made us. He creates all things. He sustains all things. He rules over all things. He's the God of infinite power. But it's interesting that Paul then goes on to say, but he's more than that. He's not only infinite, he's personal. He wants to enter into a relationship with you. Remember what John said? I had this idea of God up there, but I came to discover God in here. The God who enters into a personal relationship with us. The God who says, if you seek me and reach out after me, you will find me. Because as Christians, we believe that that's possible because God has actually come amongst us. God has visited us in the person of Jesus. What is God like? He's exactly like Jesus. When people say to me, look, I want to understand something of God, what I do is I don't give them a book of philosophy, I give them the gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You've got some gospels, I think John's gospel on your tables. Take it away, please, and read it and see what God is like. Wonderfully powerful and amazingly gentle. Someone who forgives his enemies. Someone who can be so human, so that he's in the middle of a storm at sea. He's so dog-tired, he sleeps through the storm. And yet the next minute when he wakes up, he can still the storm. And we enter into a relationship with God through Jesus. He's infinite and he's personal. Paul says, that's the God I'm telling you about. This is the God everybody needs, and in their heart of hearts, everybody longs for it, yet at the same time you're running away from God. I remember years ago reading about a test that they did with people to find out what drove them. And so it was a very simple test. They said, take a piece of paper and write down 10 things that are important to you. 10 most important things in your life. Now, if you were to write down the 10 most important things in your life, would you be able to do it? Might be a bit of a struggle, mightn't it? You know, you've got golf and curries and so on, and then you've got the obvious things, my health and my family and so on. And they say, okay, you've got 10 things now. You have to lose permanently one of them. That thing will never be in your life again. Well, for most of us, that would be comparatively easy. You know, I've never played a round of golf in my life. If I had to give up golf, well, that would be easy. It wouldn't be on my list anywhere. But you see what I mean? And when you got rid of one and you're down to 9, do another one and another one and another one. Until in the end, what's left on your paper, your top 3, are the things that really matter. And what they discovered was that in every case, without exception, when you'd gone through that process, at the end were relationships. Those are the things that really count. Yeah, if I lose everything, I can't lose those relationships. Because that's what we are. And this personal God wants to have a relationship with us. Number 2, what's the second thing? Well, the second question is, who am I? What am I as a human being? What does it mean to be human? The atheist or the agnostic asks 3 questions. And he's got an answer for all 3 questions. Where am I from? Why am I here? Where am I going? The atheist answer is very simple. Where am I from? I am an accident. Given enough time and chance and matter, life emerges and then human beings emerge. But basically, there's nothing except this physical body. Some machines are made out of metal or plastic. I'm a machine made out of meat. That's where I'm from. Why am I here? Richard Dawkins, the preeminent atheist, says, that's a stupid question. It's a meaningless question. Why am I here? There's no answer to that question because the question means nothing at all. There's no reason. Maybe you could say I'm here to pass on my genes, but that's it. End of story. And where am I going? Oblivion. Or as someone said to me when I was preaching up in Glasgow, when you're dead, you're dead. Which I think doesn't need much translation, does it? Now that's a consistent view. Where am I from? I'm an accident. Why am I here? No reason. Where do I go? Oblivion. But do you know anybody who actually lives their life on that basis? Where there's no such thing as love, or truth, or beauty, or meaning. Those things are gone, if that's the view. A very famous atheist said, what are human beings? We are a film of slime on a tiny planet orbiting an insignificant star in the middle of nowhere. So guys, when you get your girl around the table on Friday, Valentine's Day, that's a reminder, and the candles are flickering, and you look into your eyes and you say, darling, I love you, even though you are a film of slime on a tiny planet orbiting an insignificant sun in the middle of nowhere. Can I suggest, guys, you don't do that? Because actually nobody believes that. Is that all that we are? What's the Christian view? Well, the Christian view is God made me. God created me. Each one of us is unique, so we have a unique dignity. Every person in this room, every person on planet Earth is unique and has a unique dignity because God made us. He created us. He made us to be who we are. The shape of our ears, the length of our hair, or the non-existence of our hair. He made each one of us. A few years ago when my mum died, we found a photograph. It was a photograph of my mum and dad on a pier by the seaside. And on the back it said, November 1955, Blackpool. Now my question is, why on earth were you at a Blackpool in November? Okay, but nonetheless, there they were. But then I looked at the picture and I thought, hang on a minute. I'm there. Because I was born in March 1956. I was 3-4 months old. My mum knew. Well, I guess she knew. Don't think I was indigestion. And my dad knew. Probably nobody else knew, but I was there. But here's the thing. God was forming me at that point. I have significance. I have dignity because God was forming me. What does that mean? It means that the baby with Down syndrome, or the young person struggling with mental illness, or the older person with Alzheimer's, who's now a ghost at the table, or the guy sleeping rough on the street, every one of those people has a unique dignity because God made them. And why am I here? Well, I'm here to know God. He made me for a relationship with himself. I am created for delight. I'm a person of dignity. I'm a person of delight. to delight in God, to have a relationship with God, to know my Creator. That's the ultimate person. There is that vacuum inside, and what fills the vacuum? Well, a million things we try, but only God. Only God. Use this illustration more. Imagine a whale out at sea. In the sea, it lives and moves and has its being. That the whale enjoys the ocean. We're told, aren't we, that whales sing to one another in the ocean. That's where it's in its fullest element. It's the most beautiful animal, one of the biggest animals in creation, and an amazing animal in the sea. Amazing, amazing, amazing. And imagine that the whale looks at the beach and it says, wouldn't it be nice to lie on that beach in the sun? Have the occasional ice cream, you know. So he launches himself onto the beach. What happens? Well, it's disaster. The whale belongs in the sea. On the beach, it's going to die very quickly. And we belong in God. In him we live and move, have our being. That's what Paul says. But we live as if we can do without God. It's like a beach whale. A beach whale is a beautiful animal, but it's still a beach whale. And then where are we going? What's the ultimate destiny? Well, the Christian faith says death is not the end. There's something beyond death. There's eternal life. There's something called the resurrection, when God raises us in our bodies and we live with God forever. And so the Christian view of death is entirely different. I heard of a minister once who went to visit a young man who was in a hospice with just a couple of weeks to live. And they went in and the man said, look, I want to plan my funeral. I want you to tell people it's a time, I don't want to die, but I know I'm going to have a life after death. I'm sure of it because Jesus rose from the dead. Absolutely 100% convinced. So I want you to tell people at my funeral, no one's allowed to wear black. And it's to be joyful. It's a celebration. And so they talked together and they wept together and they prayed together and the minister went to leave. And as he was leaving, one of the nurses called him across and she took him into the sluice room. She said, you need to be careful with that young man. I don't know what's going on. He said, he's dying and he doesn't know it. And the minister said, what do you mean he doesn't know it? We've just been talking about his funeral. And she said, but I've never seen anything like that. He's not afraid. He's full of joy. How can he be like that? And he said, because he's got faith and hope and certainty and he's got a destiny. And she said, well, if that's the case, all I can say, he is most unsuitably joyful. See, that's the difference that it makes. I was up in the Lake District this week. I was walking with a guy. I said, what are you doing? Just preparing a message? He was a minister. What are you doing? Just having... He said, no, I'm preparing a eulogy for my mum. She died last week. I've got to fly to China. My mum's in China. She's spent her whole life serving God in China. And I'm brokenhearted, but I know where mum is. So what's the Christian view of human beings? We have dignity, we have delight in God, we have destiny. So who is God? Who am I? And then the third question, and Paul gets this, they'd actually said to Paul, tell us about Jesus and the resurrection. So that's what he does. God has appointed today when he's going to judge the world through the man that he's appointed, and he's done that by raising him from the dead. And that was the crux. That's the turning point of everything. Jesus rose from the dead. Now, when I was at university, I went as a Christian, and I was surrounded by people that didn't necessarily believe what the Bible said. And if you like, every thought that came my way was, well, can you believe that? Can you? But there were exceptions. The Lady Margaret Professor of Divinity at Cambridge University was a man called Charlie Mole. Now, Lady Margaret Professor of Divinity, that was the oldest professorship in the whole of the university. It was started by, guess what, a lady called Lady Margaret in 1502. She was the grandmother of Henry VIII, and it had been going all that time. So it was the most auspicious, and Charlie Mole, he was an amazing, he was about that tall. To lecture, he had to stand on a box, look him up afterwards. He reminded me completely of Piglet in Winnie the Pooh. That's what he looked like. But he gave these lectures, these magnificent lectures on New Testament theology. And he said, gentlemen, because he was only gentlemen in those days, gentlemen, when we study New Testament theology, we need to understand that the founding point, the beginning point, is that Jesus rose from the dead. If there'd been no resurrection, there'd be no New Testament theology, there'd be no New Testament, there'd be no church, Christ is risen. He was the most intelligent, intellectually sophisticated man I knew, and he believed it. And hundreds, millions have believed it since. It's the turning point, and I would challenge you to think through the evidence. There's loads of evidence. You know, people say, you know, what is faith? Faith is believing something that's not true. No, faith is confidence based on evidence. Faith is certainty based on evidence. You think of the first disciples. They were afraid. They were skeptical. They certainly didn't believe it was going to happen. They were certain it wouldn't happen. And yet, in a moment of time, they're completely changed. Overnight, they're so convinced, every one of them without exception, that they go and preach Jesus has risen from the dead. Look at the evidence. All over the world tonight, there are millions of people who are convinced Jesus rose from the dead. And if it's true, and I believe the evidence, I don't have enough faith to believe anything other than that. If it's true, then everything's changed. The Christian message is true. And everything Paul says is true. And there is meaning. And there is purpose. And we're not living in a world which has no meaning at all, where you're searching after meaning. God has entered into history. God has spoken. And we can trust what he's said. Everything is different if Jesus rose from the dead. And so here's the ultimate question, really. And it's the ultimate question that Paul answers. What are you going to do with Jesus? You can know God through Jesus. We talked earlier about relationships. God not out there, but God in relationship. I read once about a young woman who was born blind. She had never seen colours. Sometimes when you have no sight, you have heightened senses. And so she said, I could hear things very well. I could smell things. I loved taste. I loved music, but I'd never seen any. People had tried to explain to me what green was like. How do you explain green to someone who's never seen green? And people explained shapes, and I could touch shapes, but I'd never seen. And then in her 20s, they did an operation that restored her sight. And she said it was just like totally mind-blowing. Suddenly, for the very first time, I saw green. I saw blue. I saw people's faces. I saw the smile on the face of a child. I saw the sky. I saw the sun. I'd felt the sun. I saw it suddenly life was absolutely in a brand new dimension. And you know, that is the story of so many people who are Christians. Before I became a Christian, life was like, it was real, it was true, it was all those things, but suddenly everything is different. It's life in a new dimension. It's life in a completely different way. I'd never seen that before, and now I can see it. And it all comes through a relationship with Jesus Christ. So what's the answer to philosophy? What's the answer to the ultimate question? It is Jesus. That's why on your tables you've got two things, and we'd love you to take them. One is the Gospel of John, which is really the story of Jesus. It's a great place to start. You can read it in a couple of hours, maybe 3 hours. And the second thing is this book, Are You 100% Sure You Want to Be Agnostic? And again, it's kind of dealing with some of the questions we've dealt with tonight. But that's me done, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Paul. Just another 5-minute break, comfort break, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. We will have a roving mic to run around the room. If you're brave enough, you can give a comment or ask a question from the microphone. Or if you prefer, do scan in the QR code for Slido and submit your questions online, and we'll deal with those as well, hopefully. So 5-minute break. our final session, our Q&A session, just to wrap up with. We do have a roving mic. Where's Tom? Tom's at the back. So if we open it out, we've got a few questions on Slido, but I'd love to hear if there's any questions coming from the floor. Question or comment, if you've got anything to comment on, either anything John shared or anything Paul shared. So any brave volunteers with an opening question or comment from the floor, and Tom will come and find you. Just stick your hand up and then he'll come running. Oh, can always trust Richard for a question. Just wait for the mic, Richard.
Yeah, John, do you ever feel pressure not to talk about your faith, or pressure to where people would just dismiss you, and that puts you under pressure not to express your joy in the faith?
Thanks, Richard. I don't think I ever feel kind of overt pressure, as it were. I think sometimes it just comes down to my human frailty, really, and how brave I'm feeling. In that it's not the easiest place sometimes to express these things. And sometimes you have to be wise as well, don't you, in where you do speak about these things, in terms of you're not trying to cause potential issues and stuff. But with people that I know and that know me, then I feel comfortable with that, as it were, in that kind of context. So yeah, there's no persecution or anything like that, as there are in many countries. But there's a soft kind of pressure there in a sense to conform, I guess. But yeah, mostly it comes down to my own weaknesses and lack of bravery sometimes in some situations, I'd say. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, we'll have a couple from the Slido. So this one's addressed to you, John, again. How has your Christian faith most shaped your understanding or teaching of psychology? So how has your Christian faith most shaped your understanding or teaching of psychology?
Wow, that's a big question. It's probably a book's worth in that, isn't it? I guess two things really. One is that when I see people that are struggling and are broken and are looking for answers, that psychology and medicine can help them, and we see that, but actually it's not going to get to the real core issues. In the same way that you go in and you've broken your leg or something, the doctor's going to mend your leg and stuff, and that's going to be great. You'll be able to walk around, but you won't necessarily be able to deal with those kind of core issues as well. And I guess the other side of it is that there's an assumption in most psychology that actually we're pretty good people, that we're kind of doing our own thing, we're relatively moral, and that the average person is pretty good. That's our starting point. But actually that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches actually we're not. We're naturally pretty corrupt. And it's only through Christ really that we can actually very, very slowly maybe become more like him. And that's really counterculture, and that's quite offensive to some people as well. That to see people, particularly young people, as being not just generally good people, that they've got those, it's good really, and it's just things go wrong sometimes. So I guess they're the two things that where my faith has impacted my view of people, I guess. Okay.
Thank you, John. Any more from the floor?
Question for John. Well, for both of you, actually. What would you say is the most common argument or most common thing that people have against your Christian faith?
I guess I don't encounter that much, not potentially against my personal Christian faith, but I guess more generally that it would be seen as as quite arrogant, because it's saying, this is the only way, in a sense. So it'd be seen as being quite arrogant and closed-minded, because there's lots of things out there, and they all have value. And for this person, that might be their personal truth and their lived truth over there, and that's okay. But if you're really saying what I think you're saying, and that only this is the right way, then I think that would be very much seen as quite closed-minded and arrogant in many ways. And that's difficult, because that is what we're saying, isn't it? We're saying, actually, that it's not that all the paths lead to the top of the mountain, that actually it's only through Christ that is the only way. So, I guess I go in that direction. Thanks, Herbie.
I think that's true. And the way to answer that, I think, to a certain extent, is to point people to Jesus. Because the trouble is that all the arguments that we start off as humans, we kind of go round in circles, and it's my opinion versus your opinion, whereas actually Jesus cuts through all that. So here, people have this idea of Jesus. He was just a really nice man, and he said lots of wonderful things, love your neighbour. Look at what he said and look at what he did. And as I say, read the Gospels. That's the way I would answer that one. But then, to my experience, people's big objections to the Christian faith does depend a lot on their life experiences. And the one that comes to me more than anything else, and the one that's come up over years and years and years, is what we talked at the last Cafe Church, which is suffering. How can you explain suffering in a world if God is good? And that is one that constantly people ask. Every time I've done an evangelistic course of any sort over the years, that's almost always been one of the questions that people have raised. So we're not raising it tonight, but that's the objection that people... So there's a kind of an intellectual objection, but then there is also a kind of a moral, experiential objection. And then the third thing I'd say, I've talked with people who've said, I'm intellectually persuaded, I do believe what you say is true, but I'm not going to follow Jesus, because if I do, my life has to change. I understand what you're saying, and if it's true, and if you are correct, and I think there's a lot of evidence for it, my whole direction has to change. My life, I have to be a different person, and I'm quite comfortable where I am. So I think that's another thing that people say.
Great. Thank you, Paul and John. Oh, Andy at the back. Oh, no, Margaret.
Many years ago, I attended one or two lectures about psychology as part of a course I was doing.
Oh, there we go.
And it was suggested that we were a product of our genes and what we inherited from our parents. And the other thing was the environment to which we were brought up in and the influences we received from outside. And I just felt that there was no place for God in all of this.
Wow, Margaret, you should come up and you should do some of my lectures. This is good stuff.
Pardon?
I was saying you should come and help me do my teaching. You're good. So what was your question, Margaret? Is there a place for God there?
Yes, it just felt as if it was all just your environment and your genes or whatever. But where did God come into it?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So that would be your standard starting point, would be that we're a product of our genes, what we got from our parents, and then our environment. And to an extent that there's some truth in that. But we know that we're told that God knew us when we're being formed in the womb. So he's there at that point as well. And actually, if God is real and with us, then I'd say that's still part of our environment in a sense. You know, if I'm at home and I'm reading the Bible and God's speaking to me through that, that's my environment. That's God speaking to me through that here and now. Now, this is Paul's realm, but he does speak to us he can speak to us in supernatural ways as well. But many times it's through things that are just part of here, through nature, through friends, through pastors, through church, through the Bible. So I put that in that kind of environmental kind of aspect as well. But it's more than that as well, because he calls to our spirit as well. I'm going to pass that on to Paul there.
I think that view is very akin to something called determinism, which is basically what we say, we're just a machine. I mean, you can make a computer work. Well, I can't make a computer work, but some people can, and you know, you program it and it does what you tell it to do. And is that what I am? Am I just a machine so that my genes affect what I am and so I have no freedom of choice? And in the end, it seems to me that leads down the pathway to an end of human dignity. And it's very interesting, you know, these novels that have been written about it, you know, Brave New World and so on, which are basically saying if that's true, then there is no beauty, truth, love. The things that we know are true.
Okay.
There's a question.
There was a question back from Andy there.
Thank you both. So if you look around the world and you look at the church globally, the church is a mess. Church is not a great example very often of the things that you might read in the Bible. And sometimes when you listen to people in the church talking about the church, it's not entirely clear that they entirely themselves know what it is that they're believing in. So if you're telling us this evening that Jesus is the way, what is it that gives you utter confidence that Jesus truly is the way?
Just to respond to the church question, my friend Glenn grew up in Mississippi, and he said it was a church which was for white people. That was back in the 40s, I guess, 50s, 60s even. And he said they had two deacons who stood at the door, and if a black person came to the door, they would say to them, "This church is not for you. You go." So when he came to realize how bad that was, he kind of thought the whole church is like that. I don't want anything to do with religion, Christianity. It's such a mess. It's such ugly. It's so, and so he threw it all up. It's all nonsense, all rubbish. And it was the church that put it. And sadly, very often, is the church that puts people off. Okay, so he was working in a restaurant, and he was serving people, and he noticed that these people were Christians because they said grace at their meal, and he started a conversation with one, and the one said to him, you know, "You used to go to church, didn't you?" Glenn? "Oh no, it's all rubbish." And he came out with this whole spiel about how it was nonsense, and the man said, "I'm really sorry because sometimes Christians are a bad advertisement, but you need to think about Jesus." And he said, "Yeah, but so on." And he went with another list. "This is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong." "Yes," said this, "right. You're probably right because we are human but you need to meet Jesus." And it went on like this for I don't know how long, how many times the question came back and forth. And in the end, Glenn said, "I went away absolutely furious. But then I started reading about Jesus, and suddenly I realized that what made Christianity different was this man Jesus." And again, it comes back to that. You know, whenever we're talking about any of these questions, whatever the thing, you're always wanting to say to people, look at Jesus. You know, I remember when my friends became a Christian, he was an atheist, a chemist, did a PhD in chemistry. He said, one day someone said to me, "Read a gospel." He said, "I made the biggest mistake in all my life. I read a gospel." And as I read it, I met Jesus. And he changed my life, and he changed my life for the better. But so it comes back to that in the end. What gives us authority? It is this man Jesus. That's the starting point.
Okay. I'm going to read a couple more from Slido. Thank you for submitting these and voting on these. So the first one is not specifically to do with psychology or Paul in Athens, but on your views on AI and the rapid advancement of AI. So how do we, as Christians, ensure that we're engaging with AI, exploring, advancing, limiting its use, so that we would honor God in our lives and the world? So a bit of a general question about what do you make of AI? We've been thinking about what it is to be human. Any thoughts on how we engage with AI as Christians?
I think that's a psychological question.
I think speaking to people that are older and wiser than me, I've been told that almost in every generation, there's something new that comes in that people can often be quite worried about. I'm not sure about how to respond to. I guess with AI, sometimes it's a bit different. People talk about kind of existential kind of issues and things like that. But I at the moment, I would use it as a tool, as many people do, as I do with other things. And I think as Christians, we would say that AI can become very clever and do lots of different things, but it would never become like us. There's something different and unique about us because we're in the image of God. When I look in the mirror some mornings, I don't feel like I'm in the image of God, but that's what we're told. And a machine can never be like that. So maybe we have to be careful. Maybe we have to think about the ethics of how it's used. Maybe if we're in certain industries, we need to think about it even more, about whether or not it's going to cause other people harm or loss of earnings. Things like that. Maybe that's something we need to think and weigh up in terms of our moral response as well. But I don't think I'm not personally scared about sentient and kind of computers, as it were, in that I feel that we are unique and different in that ways. So I'm not I don't want to be naive on this or Luddite on this. I think we have to be careful about what we give machines control of. For example, I don't know, cars at the moment, perhaps, or weaponry. So I think we have to be wise. But it would be something. It's not something that keeps me awake at night.
Yeah, I mean, think of the internet, which was a great tool, so that people who've never heard about Jesus in China can get online. Well, maybe not in China, but in other places. But at the same time, it's used for a whole squadge of vile and horrible things. So it's a tool, and it depends who uses it. And I think what it shows, something that John said earlier, there is something not quite right in the human heart. We kind of veer away from truth and beauty and righteousness. It's what the Bible calls sin. Sin is a small word with an I in the middle. It's about me. I want my views and so it's a great tool, but it can be misused. And so I think and if you look, it's the same with printing. In the 16th century, printing was discovered. It changed the face of Europe. People had Bibles in their own hands. It was fantastic. And at the same time, not all books are nice and good and wholesome and all the rest. So, good tool, but what it reflects, I think, is on the bentness of our human nature.
Great. We've had a couple of questions around the whole issue of morality, right and wrong. And Paul, you alluded to this in your talk. You were kind of describing kind of atheist, agnostic thinking that life is just random and chaotic, and therefore it's meaningless, and there's no right and wrong. So there's a couple of questions here. One is, where has it gone? Yeah, so one question is, if God doesn't exist, then what is the basis, ultimately, for morality and meaning in life? And then another question is, can we not just be moral and good as people without having God and religion? So, thoughts on that?
If you look at meaning and morality, they're two different things. So Richard Dawkins, who you may have read the God Delusion, he would say the whole question, is there meaning, is a meaningless question. There is no meaning. We want one because we're weak and pathetic creatures, but there is no meaning. And now other people would say, my meaning is that I love my family. I don't believe in God, but I love my family. And that's a good thing. That's a great thing. But on what basis do you do that? On what basis is there such a thing as love? Well, you could say it's an evolutionary thing. And so you can try and search for meaning in some particular way. I would argue that for there to be meaning, there has to be something higher, something to aspire after. And God gives us meaning. As far as morality is concerned, and again, it's very interesting. One of the great philosophers of the 20th century was a man called Jean-Paul Sartre. He was a leading existentialist. And his view was, there's no right and there's no wrong. You make a decision to do something, and by doing that thing, whatever it might be, you authenticate yourself. And people might say that's good or that's bad, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just, I decide. And then there was a war in France. He was a Frenchman. It was a war with Algeria where they were dropping bombs on villages. And he wrote in the newspapers, wrote a letter to the what they're doing is horrible. It's wrong. And immediately, all his mates said, you're an idiot. We don't believe you anymore. How can you say it's wrong when wrong? So he was kind of hoisted by his own petard. And again, I just believe that deep down inside, we know some things are right and some things are wrong. And my question is, where does that come from? It comes from God. Now, we can't get rid of the stamp of God on our lives. The Bible says we're made in the image of God, and all that image is spoiled, it's still there. My wife and I are due to go up to St Andrews to speak sometime in the new year, I think it is. And in St Andrews, there's a beautiful abbey, which is a ruin. And you can see this abbey, and you can imagine what it was like. You can shut your eyes and imagine what it was like when it was in full bloom. Abbeys don't bloom, do they? But you know what I mean. It's a beautiful building, but it's just a ruin. Now, human beings, they're a kind of a moral ruin. And we know that. Just read the newspaper any day. And I look at my own life and I see the selfishness of my own life. But you can still see what we were, what the abbey was. And so we still have that thing within us that is, yes, this is right and this is wrong. I know that telling lies is wrong. I know that being unfaithful to my partner is wrong. I know that. And I mean, I think it was Freud, wasn't it, who said, well, no, you just suppress those feelings of guilt. And, well, I don't think anybody, well, some people are fans of Freud today, are they? But not many people. I think Fraser is in Fraser. Does anybody know who Fraser is? Anyway, there we go.
Thank you. Okay, I've got maybe two last questions on Slido we'll do before we wrap up. But can I just open it out? Is there any final question from the floor before we finish? Brenda? Wait a sec. Wait for the microphone.
Wait for the microphone.
Hold it close, Brenda.
How do you dress if you're telling people about Jesus and they say, no, this is our God? How do you dress saying that Jesus is the real God and by not offending the other person, like, say, a Muslim who they believe in Allah? So how would you address without offending people?
Do you want to wash it? You've got a microphone.
So you're having a discussion, you don't want to offend someone who maybe shares a different faith. Yeah. I think it depends on who it is as well. So if it's someone that you know, then you can be, hopefully they'll value you being honest about what's important to you in a gentle way. So I think if you're finding random people and shouting at them, they might be more offended. But if you know someone and you've got to know them, they trust you, then they probably would hope as a friend that you'd be honest with them about things that are important to you, maybe, even if it might be something that they would struggle with and not agree with. I think it depends. I would feel it depends on who that would be and how you maybe approach it, I think.
Just read a couple of verses. Peter writes to people about this who are facing persecution, the same kind of issues. And he says this, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. In other words, people look at your life and they say there's something different about this person. Like the guy in the hospice, there's something different. He's got a hope. He's got something different. What is it that's different about your life? So in a sense, you're in the workplace, or you're in a football team, or you're doing something, and people see the difference in your life, and they say, "What is it?" And so in that sense, your life creates the opportunity. But then he goes on, give a reason for the hope that's in you, but do it with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience. Do it gently, do it respectfully. So you don't get into a punch-up, you don't shout at people, you don't lose your temper, you do it gently. And sometimes it's better to say, look, this is getting a bit, let's just walk away. Having said all that, the Christian message is offensive. It's always been offensive. The Christian message is that we're so sinful that God had to send his son Jesus to die for us. The cross of Christ is very offensive, because it says there's nothing I can do to make myself right with God. It needs God to become like me and to take my place. That's the only hope. So that's offensive. And Jesus is God. Now, you talk to a Muslim, Jesus will say he's the son of Mary, but he's a prophet, but he's not God. Well, you can't, and we say he's God. You can't, one can't be right and the other right at the same time. One is right and one is wrong. And so that is offensive, but you do it with gentleness and respect. And you respect every person, whoever they might be, whether they disagree with you fundamentally, you respect them because they're made in the image of God. They have human dignity. And you don't, Christians in the past have had a bad record of mistreating people who were different from themselves and, trying to use force to cause people to believe. No, I think we don't do that.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to finish with just two last questions, one for John and one for Paul. John, perhaps I can ask you this one to finish. What do you make of Jordan Peterson? How does psychologist Jordan Peterson's massive popularity, and particularly his use of biblical narratives, do you think that affirms the truth of Christianity in a secular world? What do you make of Jordan Peterson and his,
That's a horrible question. So I know of Jordan Peterson, and he does come from a clinical psychology background. What I'd say is that, and this is just my personal view, so I'm not invoking the view of the church or even necessarily a biblical view here, but my personal view is that when he first started out, I thought that some of the things that he wrote were actually quite sensible and quite helpful. And I think some of the things he says now, in terms of linking with faith, are potentially helpful as well. But I feel that it's muddied by some of the other things that are said as well, which I'd really struggle with. And I think that that we're in a culture today, particularly with social media, that to stay present and current and up there, I think there's a temptation to be more radical in the things that you say. And I think that sometimes I feel that he goes in that direction to get those clicks and get that popularity still. I can't say anything. I don't know enough about what he's been saying recently in terms of his own personal faith, but some of the things I have seen, I thought, oh wow, that's quite surprised that you've said that. So I'd be cautious. I'd say there's some things in there that could be helpful, but others that maybe not so. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend. I'd be cautious. Let's put it that way.
Thanks, John. And one final question for you, Paul. What would you say is the thing that most helped you to come to faith in Jesus? At the beginning, or even as you've gone on as a Christian? What's the most helpful thing?
But two things. When I was 11, I became a Christian because of understanding Jesus had died on the cross for me. I didn't have much theology, I didn't understand it, but I saw this amazing sacrifice that I had sinned. I mean, at the end of this passage, we didn't go into it. God has appointed a day of judgment when he'll judge the world through a man he has chosen, and he's proved it by raising him from the dead. So Jesus has died in my place. That was the thing. So when I was and this sounds awful, the resurrection didn't mean much to me at all. I mean, I knew it was true, and I believed it was true, but it was the cross of Jesus that really got me at the age of 11. When I went to university, the thing that kept me going, when I was surrounded by a lot of people who were skeptical and put everything under the microscope, can you believe that? The thing that kept me going then was the resurrection. Because I said this, but I didn't develop it very much. I couldn't get around the historicity of the resurrection. I got this book, and I just want to I'll just read it to you. That's how thick it is, but I'm just going to read 2 sentences. This is by a man called N.T. Wright, who has been a professor, and I don't agree with everything he says, but he was a professor of theology at both Cambridge and Oxford and elsewhere. He's been a bishop. And this book is just on the evidence for the resurrection. And this is what he says. The resurrection took place. It was a real event. It was a significant event. In a normal sense required by historians, it was a provable event. Historians can and should write about it. We cannot account for early Christianity without the resurrection. Saying exactly what my old professor Charlie Mole said. And I had huge doubts. So I looked at the resurrection again and again and again, and the evidence was so overwhelming. There is no explanation of what happened to these men and women who were willing to die. Not a single one of them backed down and said, oh, well, no, we were making it up. They were willing to die. There is no psychological explanation. There's no sociological explanation. There's no religious explanation, except that they were utterly convinced that Jesus had died and he'd risen. And that has been a rock from that moment onwards. And I've never doubted the resurrection since. I don't doubt it tonight. There are things that I don't understand in the Christian faith. And from time to time I have doubts in all sorts of areas, because that's what it is in a fallen world. We struggle with suffering. We do struggle with doubt. But I've never doubted that. So those are the two pivotal things that brought me into the Christian faith, kept me in the Christian faith.
Great, thank you very much, guys. Just to wrap up, can we go on to the next slide, tech guys? There should be a slide. Yeah, there we go. Just to highlight, there are on your tables, hopefully, and if there's not one on your table, you'll find one on one of the other tables, hopefully. 2 bits of free literature. We would love you to take these away with you. There's a copy of John's Gospel. If you've never actually read any of the Bible for yourself, this could be, if this is true, it's life transforming. So why not take a copy of John's Gospel and just go and read it for yourself, see what it actually has to say, and see what you make of it. John's Gospel, you'll see this on the table. The other one is a book for those if you're agnostic or even atheist. This book is really there just to get you to examine why you're an agnostic or an atheist and think about what's the basis for your belief or your unbelief. So there's a great book there. Please do. These are free. Please take these away with you. Can I also just highlight, we do at this church, we love to just discuss these issues on an ongoing basis with those who are seeking and want to find out more. We've been running a course called 321. You can see a big yellow banner at the back of the church, 321. We've been running it on Tuesday evenings recently. We've got one final session this coming Tuesday at 8 o'clock here at the church in one of the upstairs classrooms. Even if you've not come to any of the other sessions, you're very welcome to come to our 4th session this coming Tuesday. But if that's something that would interest you, coming along to a short course where you can hear some more, you can raise questions and discuss things, then do feel free to scan in the QR code on the banner, and that will take you to our you show some interest kind of form, and you can put your email in and we'll get in touch with you. But thank you so much. You've listened really well. Can we show our appreciation for Paul and John and for the cake makers and the tech guys? Thank you very much.